All right. You may know me from previous dramatic episodes, such as the dismantling of the software thesis, or the griefing of the Bitcoin testnet, or more recently, the burning of quantum vulnerable Bitcoin. But today, I'm not here to provide controversy. I'll do that next week at Op Next. So why are we here? It actually all started with a post from our favorite space monkey, Mononaut. And Mononaut pointed out this interesting transaction that happened back in January. Said, hey, this looks like address poisoning. And I had heard of this term before, but it's not really something that had come up much in the context of Bitcoin. And you might ask yourself, well, what is address poisoning? And of course, there's a clue there with the highlighting that Mononaut provided in the screenshot. So what is it? Essentially, this is an attack where someone goes out and they find a bunch of target Bitcoin addresses that look like juicy targets. They probably have a decent amount of Bitcoin in them. And then they'll use a script to generate a vanity address that looks very similar to the target address. And in particular, it'll have similar starting characters and similar ending characters. And this, of course, is just a simple brute forcing type of algorithm. You just keep generating private keys until you get one that produces a script with an address that has those similar characteristics. Then they put a little bit of money into their newly generated address, and then they send that money to the target address. And we're usually talking like 500 to 1,000 Satoshi. So not a ton of money, just enough to get that transaction onto the blockchain. And then they wait. And they hope that what happens is that this victim eventually makes a mistake. The victim has to be naive. They have to go back, look at their wallet transaction history, and be using a wallet that makes this easy and possible to do, and they hope that that victim basically copies and pastes the wrong address from their transaction history and end up sending it to the attacker. So some example transactions here just to show you that this hits pretty much every different type of address that you'll see out there. And on the left will be the poison address of the attacker, and you can see them sending a few hundred sats over to the target victim address, which has those similar starting and ending characters. So why does it work? Like I said, people are not checking all of the address necessarily when they're sending it. There are a number of especially mobile apps out there that may truncate a lot of the address, so it's actually very difficult to check the entire thing. Or, they're just lazy. This is long. We're talking like, what, 30 to 50 characters? Nobody wants to check all of that. And the UX may not make it easy to do so. And then, of course, if their wallet makes it easy to copy and paste from the transaction history, then that could make it easier for someone to make this mistake. So what did I do? Well, I wanted to understand what is the practicality of this attack. It clearly seems to be happening, but how often is it happening? And is the attack actually economically feasible? So I wrote a script, I scanned the entire blockchain, and I tried to find every transaction that I thought was meeting these characteristics of address poisoning. And what in particular was I looking for? I was looking for transactions with one input and one output. Those in and of themselves are fairly rare. You almost always have a second change output when you're sending money on Bitcoin. And then, of course, looking for having at least 4 characters at the beginning and the end of the exact same, and of course not being the exact same address sending to itself. And it's possible that there may be a few false positives in here, but I don't think that that's really the case because I scanned the entire Bitcoin blockchain and did not see any hits until just about a year ago. In particular, block 797570, which was July of 2023, is when we start seeing this happen. And it's not just one. It's usually dozens of them happening in any given block. This is happening in bursts, not in a consistent pattern. Definitely seems to be a human-driven type of activity where they're probably doing some research, finding a new batch of target victim addresses, and then just sending all at once. First they're doing a big fan-out transaction that'll have hundreds and hundreds of outputs to fund all of these poison addresses, and then each of those will have the one-to-one actual deposit address into the victim's account. So it was pretty quiet for several months, and then we saw another batch of them happening, and it was quiet again, saw some more batches, and then there was a 2-month break, and then they actually just started doing this again this week. So what were the stats? What did we find from this? Found about 48,000 different transactions and unique Bitcoin addresses that seem to have been targeted. And you could easily sum up how much block space did they buy. They bought about 4 blocks worth of block space over that 1.5 to 2 year period. And they ended up spending about 0.3 Bitcoin. So this attacker, they didn't spend a ton. I mean, $24,000 isn't nothing, but considering that they were able to hit nearly 50,000 different targets, that's pretty decent. That's what, 50 cents per target. So looking at some of the breakdowns, I was trying to understand, how is this attacker trying to target the different addresses? And this is sort of a breakdown of the wallet balances or the address balances that they were attacking. I don't know if there's too much to learn from this because this is also fairly consistent with the overall distribution of balances on the blockchain, other than the fact that, of course, they're ignoring dust addresses. So they're generally ignoring any addresses that have less than 1 Bitcoin. If you throw out all of the less than 1 Bitcoin addresses, this is generally what the distribution looks like anyway. One thing that I found really interesting, because I put myself in the shoes of the attacker, and I think for an attack like this, you're going to want to go after addresses that are pretty consistently and regularly spending, because each time they're making a spin, that's a potential mistake that they might make. They might choose the wrong address. And this is where I think the attacker, from my perspective, they did not optimize this very well. Maybe they had some other reason for doing this. But the biggest surprise to me is that of the 48,000 addresses they targeted, 12,000 of those addresses had never spent funds. So, maybe this is really just a spray and pray, and they're hoping, maybe eventually someday, of course, that person's going to spend the coin. But, about a quarter of these addresses to this day have never spent those funds. So maybe they're just playing the really long game, but I think that that is a suboptimal attribute that they probably should have filtered out. And other than that, most of these addresses are very sparingly actually spending funds. So I was kind of surprised. I thought that they would have gone after more addresses that have a higher velocity, a higher rate of spending. And similar to that, what is the amount of Bitcoin? Like I said, a quarter of them, 0 spending, and then most of them are spending less than 1 Bitcoin per transaction. So what about script types? This was also kind of interesting because they're targeting the pay-to-public key hash addresses, which are not the most commonly used addresses these days, but perhaps that's just because they are older and they have a lot of funds sitting in them from a long time ago. And I didn't try to break down SegWit wrapped P2SH. I was just looking at the high-level scripts. I did not see any taproot addresses that have been targeted. Maybe that's just because taproot addresses tend not to have a lot of funds in them. That could be another potential interesting thing to try to understand. But for whatever reason, taproot is not being targeted by address poisoning, at least not yet. So is it successful? Is this a positive ROI? Well, that took some more research, because then I had to look at all of these addresses, and then I had to look to see if any of the victim addresses had sent funds back to a poison address. And that was tricky because you basically need to have an indexer where you've indexed the whole blockchain by address, not a lot of local indexing solutions make it easy for that. You can't just call the Bitcoin Core RPC to do that. But I did find one. And the reason why I'm quite sure that this is actually a successful attack is because we can actually look and see what happened. And so this first transaction is the attacker sending from the poison address to the target address. And you can see the timestamps in the upper right there. And let's see, that was on January 18th. And then a month and a half later, the target address sent money to the poison address. And within about 12 hours, the attacker, the owner of that poison address, moved the funds to some other wallet. So why do I think that this was an attack and not just something else going on? Well, we can then see that same victim address wallet realized they made a mistake. And about 12 hours after they sent that first 0.1 Bitcoin to the attacker, you can see they sent 0.1 Bitcoin to some other address. So it looks like that second transaction was the one that they had actually intended to do, but they screwed up the first time. So if we look at the ROI, it's not great.Ey're down about 0.2 Bitcoin right now, but I think that this still is not great. The fact that it's a 1 out of 48,000 success rate is good in and of itself, but just due to the nature of Bitcoin, this very easily could have been a highly profitable attack. The attacker was unlucky that the one person who has been tricked so far only sent 0.1 Bitcoin because they had 8 Bitcoin in that address. They very easily could have sent that entire balance, which would have made this overall a highly, highly profitable attack. And of course, like I said, this is an ongoing thing. We should expect that given enough transactions and enough target victims, someone else will probably make the same mistake, and possibly for a lot more. So from a practical perspective, how do you ensure that you don't shoot yourself in the foot here? Well, really, the easiest thing and the most important thing, you just follow the best practice of not reusing addresses. Like, you shouldn't be copying and pasting addresses from your own transaction history. If you don't do that, then there's really no way for you to get hit by this particular attack. And when you are sending Bitcoin, you should check the entire address. I think that's something that we've said as a community for a really long time, but humans are extremely lazy individuals, and this is the type of thing that I think you've just got to keep beating people over the head about. And this, now that we are aware of it, we can continue to monitor for it. And I will say props to Mempool, because they, just in the past few weeks, have started adding alerting within their own block explorer, where transactions that appear to be poison attempts are actually getting flagged, so that hopefully this will save some people from making this mistake. But of course, this is the nature of trustless and permissionless networks, so it's, I think, going to be an ongoing issue, and just a question of, if it gets worse, do we, as like a software and wallet development ecosystem, need to be more proactive and take more measures to help prevent people from falling victim? Sure.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Two questions. One is, do you think it's a single entity that did this based on, I guess, the clustering? And the second is, you only looked at transactions going from the real address to the fake address. But I would imagine if I'm copying an address, the wrong one, I might be putting that in an exchange, or I might be putting it in my wallet, but it's picking a different coin. So have you also looked at how much money actually went to the fake addresses in total, rather than just from the real to the fake?
No, these are both potential avenues for further research. So I didn't do clustering analysis. That it's not my forte, but I would be interested in looking into that further.
I mean, you can just make a wallet that includes all those fake addresses and see what the balance is, basically.
True, fair enough. Just one wallet with 48,000 keys, I'm sure that'll scale just fine.
Just open a pull request if it's too slow.
Yeah.
A GitHub issue, I mean. The
But yeah.
maintainers will fix it.
Yeah, so there's definitely room for further research on this, and really, as far as I'm aware, I haven't heard of anyone like publicly broadcasting and saying that they have been a victim of these attacks. So
exact attack, but on another chain.
yeah, yeah. So these type of attacks seem to happen a lot on Ethereum, and I think it's just interesting to start to try to gauge, is this same technique starting to be applied more to Bitcoin, and how aware of it do we need to be? Another thing that I think is worth pointing out is that I think that this is a result of the fact that we are in a very low fee environment. If we had 100 Satoshi per virtual byte fees going on, I think that would greatly disincentivize people from doing a lot of these dusting attacks, unless they figured out other ways to increase the attack success rate.
Yeah, at last year's Bitcoin Expo, we had a nice little presentation on wallet fingerprinting. Do you know what wallet that victim was using, so I know what wallet not to use?
No, but anyone who wants to kind of build upon this research, I've got all the raw data available, and I'm more than happy to share all of the data that I've collected so far.
So that was one of my questions as well. And then the follow up to that was going to be, you said like thinking like an attacker, how you would do it. So clearly, if the target wallet happens to be vulnerable in that it only shows, the first few beginning characters of your address, then thinking like an attacker, those are like I would look for wallets with that fingerprint and only attack that particular wallet. But I wanted to ask also if you're to kind of shill one of the things that I work on. Are you familiar with the Bitcoin kernel project? Because you said dealing with like calling Bitcoin Core RPCs over and over becomes untenable. So one of the exact purposes of the Bitcoin kernel project is to make it so that you can write little tools to do exactly these types of indexes very quickly and easily. So if it's not something that you've looked at before, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
No, cool. No, I've heard of the kernel project, but I have not actually tested it out. So worth looking into.
Sure. Great. Thank you.
So when I was looking at your slides, something probably like obvious occurred to me, that the address type in the front of an address means that like you don't have to grind that part, like BC1. And so did you notice, like based on the address type, they were doing like more or less grinding? And do you have any idea on how to like represent an address type that doesn't, from like a human vision perspective, make it cheaper to grind?
Let's see, I did not, like, for example, when looking at the Bech32 style addresses, I was still only seeing like another one or two. I didn't see like, the first three and then another 3 or 4. I don't know why that's the case, but I haven't played around with the vanity gen for those addresses. I think, the main interesting thing here is that, I think we've seen people, at least traditionally vanity gen, you're only doing the first X number of characters. And this is, I think, the first time we've seen people who are also doing the end characters. And I think the main reason for that is that we may have unintentionally gotten people complacent with only checking the first few characters of the address under the idea that, oh, those are the only ones that could get brute force, because you have to brute force like in that direction starting from the beginning. So I think this is just another good practice for people to be cognizant of, is that just checking the first few is not good. Just checking the first few and the last few is not good. You really need to check the entire address.
So I have a tweet here from our favorite mempool monkey. The DMM Japanese exchange attack was an address poisoning, but your script I don't think picked it up, because it was going from their internal cold storage, which was a pay to script hash, to a pay to public key hash for their hot address, and that was 4,500 Bitcoin. That was a 2 of 3, and they did address poisoning on their hot wallet address. So they managed to trick the exchange into co-signing and then doing the 4,500 Bitcoin. So I think that's, operationally, internally, thinking if you're managing large sums too, managing that stuff. But I think I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely more research to be done to understand how some of the different wallets display like multi-output receive transactions, for example. I think I saw you tweeted something recently where Mempool was showing the poison, a potential poison output where it had probably like 5 or 10 outputs that had similar looking addresses. And the main question there is just how do those get displayed in the wallets? And it's going to vary from wallet to wallet. And that's why I think doing the wallet fingerprinting and then looking at each wallet's own displays to understand which ones are going to be more susceptible to that would be an important avenue of research here. But that's why I think that there's a lot of them that are just one input, one output, because it's so simple and it's more likely that any given wallet is going to show both of those addresses.
Thank you for your talk. I've had this experience on the Solana blockchain. I opened a wallet one day and saw $1.4 million worth of Solana that had exited my wallet. And I just thought of the movie Fargo. If you've seen it, there's a bag of money that gets passed around and bad things happen to everybody that gets the bag. So I was happy that that didn't happen to me. But what I did learn in my investigation of dusting was that for people in that kind of case, they're being targeted for doxing and blackmail and things like that as well. So I really do appreciate the talk because I don't think it's talked about enough. I'm a trader, I teach trading, and when I brought it up to people in my group, one of the guys was like, oh yeah, you should turn your wallet off to certain types of dusting. And I said, yes, but you have 10 years of experience in crypto and 5 years of trading, and regular people are not aware of this at all. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's room, I think, for pretty much any wallet out there to try to safeguard against this attack, though this is where it gets tricky. Like, as a wallet software developer, it would not be difficult at all to just add in a filter rule that says, do not display any incoming transactions below a value of X. But that can get tricky too, especially if we're talking about people who are using meta protocols on top of Bitcoin where they may be sending dust, but it's representing something else. So it's very hard, I think, to just tell everyone across the board, never display any transactions that are depositing like less than 1,000 Satoshis or whatever. But at the very least, I think that it could be helpful to show some sort of warning, especially if you see these addresses look the same. Like, I think it would be easy for wallets to say, oh, this came from a similar looking address, just throw up a big red flag, do not interact.
So do we have anything else to offer in terms of inspecting addresses that isn't just checking the full like long string that doesn't fit in like portrait mode on mobile? Like there's SSH, like ASCII key art, and like other things, but do you think there's any other like alternative that it would increase safety besides just?
If I recall correctly, Blockchain Commons had a standard. Was that what you were referencing?
I'm not referencing something specific.
Yeah, so I think Blockchain Commons had a standard for addresses that basically turns it into a like 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 pixel, colorized pixel map that would just make it, I think, easier for you to differentiate, like, is it the same address or a different address? But as far as I'm aware, there aren't any wallets, or at least any mainstream level adopted big wallets that have adopted that standard. But it's certainly possible. And really what we're talking about is like a data visualization and representation problem. And I think that as nerds, we might be used to seeing really long hashes and stuff, but we have to understand that the average person who sees a long hash, or really any long random string, their eyes are just going to glaze over and they're just going to start clicking.
Hi, Jameson. At the end of all of this, are you going to tell us that you're actually the attacker the whole time?
Well, no, that would be incredibly embarrassing because I lost so much money. No, if this had turned out to be a highly profitable attack, then I would be more worried about people looking into doing it more often. But I'm generally a security researcher. I've been building multi-sig security products for 10 years, so For me, this is just, raise the alarm, and, if people wish to continue the research, to figure out, what is the severity, so that, this is a sort of community security problem. We have to be aware of this dynamic security environment and new types of attacks that seem to be popping up. So yeah, I had someone pull me aside earlier and say, I hate it whenever you give a talk because I always get really scared. And unfortunately, that's the nature of the game. But the nice thing about this, like, you really don't have to be scared about this as long as you're not reusing addresses or not just copying addresses willy-nilly out of your transaction history. So everyone, practice good blockchain hygiene and you'll be just fine. Thank you.